I don't think there's an episode of Better Call Saul that has aged as well as season 6 episode 11, Breaking Bad. The first time I watched it, I found it to be a weak link in what was otherwise a perfect stretch of episodes, but on rewatch I think it's by far one of the most psychologically fascinating episodes on the show, largely due to the relationship between Walt and Saul. In case you guys need a recap, Jimmy does not like this man whatsoever. At the end of the episode, he alludes to Walt being an asshole, and we spend a ton of Breaking Bad, the show, focusing on Walt demeaning Saul time and time again. It's actually their very last interaction too, so it's not a good final impression. I'd also imagine Saul feels a ton of resentment towards Walt for dragging him into this situation to begin with. His current impotence and powerlessness is ultimately due to Walt. I can imagine some of the resentment comes from there. In that sense, we notice a pattern related to how Walt affects Saul. Walt makes the man feel powerless, whether it's his actions blowing up in Saul's face and forcing him to flee to Nebraska, or Walt coercing Saul into staying with him at the beginning of season 5. Walt constantly does things that strip Saul of control, and if you're a main character in the Breaking Bad franchise, that is the single worst thing anybody could do to you. There is a clear power imbalance here. And remember Saul's worldview? There are wolves and there are sheep. A hunter and a hunted. Walt is a wolf as far as Jimmy's concerned. This is why it makes perfect sense for Saul to emulate Walt in his relapse, as many people have pointed out.
Guy with that mustache probably doesn't make a lot of good life choices.
You see it in his bluntness, in his manipulation, in his more commanding and aggressive demeanor. You see it in how he concocted a whole crime project and dragged along Jeff as the lackey, kind of like our iconic crime partnership. And this all tracks with the idea of scams being a way for Jimmy to express his power. It's a dog-eat-dog world from Jimmy's point of view, with power structures and winners and losers. He uses scams to numb his emotional pain because it's how he exercises his will upon the world and fights back against the systems that demeaned him and his family. Season 6 episode 11 is about Jimmy's ultimate relapse. Kim advises him to turn himself in, and in that moment comes crashing down months of a subconscious lingering hope that maybe Kim will accept him or return. Jimmy's frustration and powerlessness over the situation in Nebraska all culminates in this relapse. As such, he emulates the wolf that thrusted him into this position to begin with. The wolf that he hates so much and makes him feel powerless, he can now channel some of that power himself. Now, there are people who make Jimmy feel powerless, like Howard for example, and he does feel the need to tear down Howard as a result of this, but he never emulates Howard like he does with Walt. And it seems to be because there's a sense of envy here. After all, it's not like Howard was a guy who felt powerless and then broke out of the boundaries of what's allowed in order to express power the way Jimmy and Walt both did. Howard represented the norms in society that Jimmy wanted to rebel against, whereas Walt did what Jimmy did, except he also dominated Jimmy in the process, hence the envy. We can also sense some jealousy in the final episode, with the whole "he couldn't have done it without me" stuff. It's true that he flipped this around immediately after to come clean as Jimmy, but the phrase itself emanates a sense of pride and a desire to get the credit people attributed to Walt. All this considered, this episode is a showcase of Jimmy subconsciously emulating Walt in order to soothe his pain. Of course, it's not purely an imitation of Walt that goes on, but also an attempt to get one over Walt. It's made pretty explicit that Saul associates Walt with the cancer patient he's about to rob, saying that people with cancer can be assholes. In that sense, his desperation to rob the cancer patient, even in such a reckless manner that leads to his downfall, partially stems from his desire to spite Walt. We all know why by now. Walt made him feel powerless and Jimmy wants to feel powerful. He can't do anything to Walt anymore, so he's subconsciously settling for the next best thing. This also further reinforces the idea that he blames Walt for his predicament and his current feelings of being trapped. But there's another angle to this that I find extremely fascinating. Actually, my interpretation here is the whole reason why I want to make this video. So in an interview with Bob Odenkirk about the finale, the interview notes the similarities Chuck has to Walt in the conversation Saul and Walt have in the finale. Odenkirk notes all these similarities, such as Walt's intelligence, his condescension, his constant disrespect of Jimmy, and says that it's another scenario where someone is unknowingly rebuilding all the bad parts of their childhood. In this case, Jimmy having a new Chuck in his life. The interview is really interesting, and I'll link it in the description if you want to read it. But if you want to run with this idea that Walt is Chuck 2.0, that adds yet another layer to this episode. It goes without saying that Jimmy created the Saul persona largely to shield himself from the trauma he underwent due to his relationship with Chuck. It's what all of season 4 was about, especially the finale. It's useful to look at the Saul persona as body armor meant to protect against Chuck. Every time Walt demeans Jimmy, every time Walt evokes Chuck, he's denting that body armor and reactivating that discomfort inside Jimmy. His attempt to run away from Chuck paradoxically led him right to Chuck again. This means we could look at Jimmy's actions in this episode as an attempt to repair the dents in his armor. By emulating Walt, by spiting Walt, by proving himself better than Walt, he can reinforce the strength of his armor. After all, this is some of the highest discomfort he's felt in a while and the strongest urge he's felt to dig deeper into his scams. He needs strong body armor or the cope won't be as effective. This, I think, is why we see him do what he did. His attempt to get one over Walt is ultimately just yet another attempt to shield himself and bury his feelings. Subtle storytelling that ties the two series together wonderfully and sets up a strong dynamic between our two main characters. Perfect episode, perfect show. Hope you enjoyed.